The morning they told me to leave, I was eating cereal at the kitchen table I had bought with my own money, sitting on a chair I had carried up 2 flights of stairs myself, in a house where I had paid more than half the utility bills for the past 3 years. My mother set a folded piece of paper next to my bowl without making eye contact. My father stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, staring at the wall just above my head. My sister leaned against the refrigerator I had replaced after the old one broke down, picking at her nail polish with a look of quiet satisfaction she wasn't even trying to hide. The piece of paper was a handwritten list. My mother had titled it Outstanding Balance. It included charges for my childhood bedroom, monthly fees for using the kitchen, and a line item labeled simply Inconvenience Costs. The total at the bottom was just over $40,000. Underneath the total, in my father's handwriting, were the words, "We need you to leave by Friday." It was Tuesday. I sat there for a long moment looking at that piece of paper. I thought about the night 3 years earlier when my sister had called me, crying, saying her marriage was falling apart and she needed somewhere to go. I had been renting a studio apartment across town, finally stable after years of grinding through entry-level tech jobs, living lean and saving every dollar I could for the business idea I had been building in my head since college. I gave up that apartment. I moved back into my childhood home to make room for her. I told myself it was temporary. It was not temporary. I folded the piece of paper and put it in my pocket. I pushed my cereal bowl to the center of the table and I went upstairs to pack. I want you to understand something about the 3 years I spent in that house before everything changed. I was not the dramatic one. I was not the difficult one. That was always the story my sister told about me, that I was unstable, that I was chasing fantasies, that I needed to be managed. She had been telling that story since we were teenagers. Our parents had been believing it just as long. I had spent most of my adult life trying to disprove a narrative that had been decided before I was old enough to defend myself. My sister's husband had moved in 6 months after she did. He worked in marketing. He was charming in the specific way that men who have never been told no are charming, smooth, and a little too comfortable, always the loudest laugh in the room, always angling towards something you couldn't quite name. My father thought he was brilliant. My mother made his favorite dinner every Sunday. When he and my sister fought, which they did constantly and loudly, my parents took his side with a consistency that still baffles me when I think about it. I had made a mistake. That was the honest truth of it. I had made one significant mistake, and it had cost me more than I understood at the time. 8 months before they handed me that list, I had been sitting at the kitchen table late on a Wednesday night, working on the pitch deck for my startup. I had been developing the core concept for 2 years, a platform that used behavioral data to help small businesses predict customer churn before it happened, specifically designed for service-based businesses that couldn't afford enterprise-level analytics tools. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of thing that got written up in tech blogs. But the market was real, the problem was real, and I had spent 18 months building a working prototype in the evenings after my day job. My sister's husband came downstairs for water. He sat across from me and asked what I was working on. I told him. I was tired and I was excited, and I made the mistake of being honest with someone who had been smiling at me for 3 years. I walked him through the entire deck. He asked smart questions. He nodded in the right places. He said it was the most interesting thing he'd heard in years. 2 weeks later, I found out that he had pitched a version of my concept to a former colleague who ran a small venture fund. He had changed the name, swapped out some of the terminology, added a few features I had never mentioned. But the core architecture, the specific market positioning, the key insight that differentiated the product from existing tools, it was mine. Word for word, in places. When I confronted him, he laughed. Not nervously, just laughed, like I had said something mildly amusing. He told me ideas weren't property. He told me I hadn't built anything real yet. He told me that if I had been serious about it, I would have filed patents, which I had actually been in the process of doing, a fact I kept to myself in that moment. When I told my sister, she told my parents before I could. By the time I sat down with them, the story had already been rewritten. In their version, I had been stealing his work. In their version, he had come to me with the concept months earlier and I had claimed it as my own. My mother said I had always had a habit of taking credit for things that weren't mine. My father said my sister's husband was family now, and family didn't do what I was accusing him of. My sister sat on the couch looking wounded in a way that made me want to put my fist through the wall. I didn't. I went upstairs. I kept working. I found a patent attorney named Gerald the following week. I had already documented everything, the original files with their creation timestamps, the email threads where I had bounced early versions of the concept off a former professor, a recorded voice memo from 8 months earlier where I had walked through the entire business model out loud while driving home from work. Gerald told me the documentation was strong. He told me to keep building and keep quiet. I kept building. I kept quiet. And I kept recording. I put my phone face down on the kitchen table every time my sister's husband talked about business. I left a small digital recorder running in my jacket pocket during family dinners where he liked to hold court about the startup he was developing. I documented everything. I did not tell anyone I was doing it. I just worked and I waited and I recorded, because Gerald had told me that the moment this became a legal matter, documentation would be everything. That was the context for the Tuesday morning when my mother set a piece of paper next to my cereal bowl. I packed 2 bags. I took my laptops, my external hard drives, my notebooks, and the small fireproof box where I kept my most important documents. I left everything else. I did not say goodbye. I loaded my car in 4 trips and I drove away without looking back at the front door. I had exactly $912 in my checking account. I called a woman named Patricia Chen from the highway. She was a former colleague who had left our company 2 years earlier to run a small, tech-focused investment firm out of Philadelphia. We had stayed in touch. She had asked me twice about my side project, and I had been vague both times, not ready. I was ready now. I need a meeting, I said. How soon? She asked. Today, if possible. There was a pause. Come to the office at 4. I drove 3 hours to Philadelphia, with everything I owned in the back seat. Patricia listened to my full pitch for 45 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she looked at me. The IP situation, she said. Tell me everything. I told her everything. I showed her Gerald's documentation. I showed her the timestamps, the voice memo, the email threads with my professor. I showed her the recordings I had made at the dinner table. Patricia nodded slowly. We deal with the legal piece first, she said. Then we build. She connected me with her firm's legal team the following morning. Gerald flew up from D.C. Over the next 6 weeks, while I slept on Patricia's guest room pull-out couch and ate takeout containers of lo mein at 11 o'clock at night, the legal strategy came together. My sister's husband had made the fundamental error of actually filing for provisional patent protection using my architecture, which meant there was now a formal, dated, public record of him claiming work that I could prove was mine, created earlier, documented thoroughly. Gerald called it a gift. He said most IP thieves were smarter than that. I did not call my family. They did not call me. I assumed they had forgotten about me the same way they had forgotten about me my entire life quickly, and with relief. I was wrong about the forgetting part, as it turned out. Patricia's firm provided seed funding. I hired 2 engineers I had worked with at my previous job, both of whom I trusted completely. We built in a rented workspace in a converted warehouse outside Philadelphia, working 18-hour days through the winter, surviving on bad coffee, and the specific kind of energy that comes from having nothing left to lose. By spring, we had a product. By summer, we had 12 paying clients. By fall, we had 47. The growth was not explosive. It was steady, which in my experience is more dangerous to competitors because they don't notice it until it's too late. Our churn prediction accuracy rate was 11 points higher than anything else in our market segment. Word spread through small business networks the way good tools always spread quietly, personally, one owner telling another at a conference or in an industry forum. We didn't spend $1 on marketing for the first 8 months. Then a profile piece ran in a regional business publication. Then a larger outlet picked it up. Then a reporter from a national tech newsletter wrote about us in a piece about underserved small business tools. The headline used my full name. It mentioned the company valuation. It mentioned Philadelphia. It mentioned me specifically. With a photo. It went up on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, I had a voicemail from my mother. I did not listen to it. I sent it to voicemail storage and kept working. By Thursday evening, I had 14 missed calls. By Friday morning, 29. My sister had texted 11 times, ranging from friendly to confused, to something that read like legal threats she had clearly not written herself. My father left a voicemail that started with "sweetheart" and ended with something about how families needed to stick together in hard times. My sister's husband sent me a LinkedIn message congratulating me on the company's success and suggesting we grab coffee to talk about potential synergies. I screenshotted it and forwarded it to Gerald. By the following Monday, I had 53 missed calls from numbers associated with my family. I know because I had Patricia's assistant log them all. I did not answer a single one. What happened next came from a direction I had not anticipated. An acquisition offer arrived. I won't pretend I had been expecting it that soon. Patricia had told me we were building toward it, that the metrics were the kind acquirers paid attention to, that the IP portfolio we had quietly assembled, including the legal resolution of the dispute with my sister's husband, which had concluded 4 months earlier in a settlement that I am not permitted to discuss in detail but which resulted in him having no claim whatsoever to anything I had built, made us a particularly clean target. Still, when the offer came in, the number on the page made me sit very still for about 30 seconds. $29 million. Patricia told me to counter. We countered. They came back. We went back and forth for 3 weeks. The final number was $34 million, all cash, with a 2-year retention package for me and my core team. The deal closed on a Wednesday. By Wednesday evening, my phone had 61 missed calls. I listened to one voicemail. It was from my sister. Her voice was different than I had ever heard it, not the practiced hurt she usually performed, not the theatrical disappointment she used to manage our parents. She sounded genuinely afraid. She said that her husband had told her something about the legal situation that she hadn't known before. She said she needed to talk to me. She said please, which was a word I had not heard from her in years. I did not call back. What she didn't know, and what I had known for several months by that point, was that the legal matter had grown beyond the civil dispute Gerald and I had initiated. When my sister's husband used my documented proprietary architecture in his provisional patent filing, he had done so while employed at a company that had given him confidentiality agreements covering competitive business development. His former colleague at the venture fund, the one he had pitched my concept to, had kept records of that meeting. When Gerald's team subpoenaed those records as part of the civil process, what emerged was a picture that went beyond stealing my idea. He had been systematically doing this, gathering concepts from people around him, filing early-stage IP claims, selling those claims to a third-party holding company he was connected to through 2 shell entities. I was not the only person he had done this to. I was just the one who had documented everything. Gerald had turned over the full file to the FBI 11 months earlier. I had not told my family. I had not told anyone except Patricia. The federal investigation moved slowly, the way federal investigations do. It moved in the background while I built my company, while I grew my client base, while I negotiated my acquisition. It moved while my family left voicemails I did not return and sent texts I did not answer. It concluded 3 weeks after my acquisition closed, with a 7-count indictment that included wire fraud, conspiracy to commit intellectual property theft, and 2 counts of mail fraud. My sister's husband was arrested on a Thursday morning. I found out from Gerald, who called me before the news was public. I was sitting in my new apartment in Philadelphia. I had signed the lease the week the acquisition closed, the first place I had lived alone in 3 years. A clean 2-bedroom with tall windows, and a small balcony where I had put a single potted plant, and I listened to Gerald tell me the details in his careful, measured way. And when he finished, I said thank you and hung up and sat quietly for a long time. Then I made coffee and went to work. The news coverage was significant. His name was attached to a scheme that had affected 7 individuals and 2 small companies over a 4-year period. My case was described as the one that had provided the clearest documentation. The FBI agent quoted in the press release used the phrase meticulous record-keeping to describe the evidence I had supplied. My sister called 41 times in the 48 hours after the arrest. My parents called 22 times combined. I counted because Patricia's assistant was still logging them. My mother finally got through on a Saturday afternoon. I answered because I had decided I wanted to answer exactly once, and I wanted to do it on my own terms, from my apartment, sitting in a chair I had chosen, surrounded by a life I had built without any of them. She started with "I didn't know." She moved to "We were misled." She arrived at "We're your family, and families forgive." I let her talk for 4 minutes without interrupting. I had set a timer on my watch before I picked up. When the 4 minutes were up, I said, "I'm going to say this once, and I won't repeat it." She went quiet. "You handed me a bill for my own childhood, and told me to leave by Friday. You chose to believe a story about me that you knew wasn't true, because believing it was more convenient than the alternative. You have called me 63 times in the past 3 weeks, and not one of those calls was about me. Every single one was about what was happening to your family, your reputation, your comfort. I know that because not one message asked how I was doing. Not one." She started to say something. "I'm not finished," I said. "I don't hate you. I want to be clear about that because I think you've been expecting anger, and I don't have any left. What I have is a life I built without you, and I intend to protect it. Please don't call me again." I hung up. I turned my phone face down on the coffee table. I sat with the silence of my apartment for a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint sound of traffic 3 floors below, the late afternoon light coming in clean and flat through the tall windows. Then I picked up my laptop and kept working. My sister's husband took a plea agreement 5 months later. The terms included restitution payments to all affected parties, 18 months in a minimum security facility, and 3 years of supervised release. His legal fees had already consumed most of their joint savings. My sister, who had filed for separation the week after the arrest, was navigating what I understand to be a very complicated financial disentanglement from a person who had been quietly running schemes she claims she knew nothing about. I have no way of knowing how much of that is true. I have chosen not to spend energy finding out. My parents sold the house 8 months after everything collapsed. Between the legal costs they had contributed to in the early months before they understood the scale of the problem, and some financial decisions my father had made based on my sister's husband's advice over the years, they were in a position that required downsizing significantly. They moved into a rental on the other side of the city. My mother, who had not worked outside the home in 20 years, took a part-time position at a medical office answering phones. My father, whose contractor business had suffered from the association with the scandal in a small business community where reputation moved fast, was rebuilding slowly. They sent me a card at Christmas. I kept the envelope unopened on my desk for 2 weeks before I put it in the recycling bin without reading it. This is the part of the story where people expect me to talk about forgiveness. I have thought about that word a lot in the past year. I have come to believe that forgiveness is something people ask for when they want to be released from consequences, and something people grant when they're ready to release themselves from pain. I am not interested in managing anyone else's consequences. My own release happened gradually, without ceremony, over the course of 18 months of building something real out of nothing. It happened in a rented warehouse in Philadelphia at 2 in the morning when a piece of code finally worked the way I had imagined it. It happened in a conference room when my first enterprise client signed a year-long contract and shook my hand. It happened on the afternoon the acquisition closed, and Patricia and I sat on the floor of our empty office, sharing a bottle of sparkling wine from paper cups, because we hadn't thought to bring glasses. Forgiveness, as it turned out, wasn't something I needed to perform for anyone. The healing had already happened. I just hadn't been paying attention to it because I had been too busy building. What I know now, on the other side of all of it, is that the worst thing they ever did to me was also the most useful. When you are forced out of a space where you have been consistently underestimated, you stop spending energy on the exhausting work of being underestimated. You stop softening your ideas to make them more palatable to people who have already decided not to believe in you. You stop apologizing for taking up room. The cardboard box my father handed me that Tuesday morning was, in retrospect, the most generous thing any of them had ever given me. I do not recommend waiting for someone to throw you out before you start building. If you are sitting in a room right now where someone is telling you that your ideas are too big, your ambition is inconvenient, your success is somehow something you took from someone else, you do not have to wait for them to hand you a list. You can stand up and walk out on your own terms, at a time of your choosing, with everything that matters packed carefully in bags you carried yourself. But if they have already thrown you out, If you are already in the parking lot with 2 bags and $900 and the weight of a story that was never really yours, I want you to know something. The cold air outside is cleaner than anything inside that house was. Start driving. Call the person who asked about your work and got a vague answer because you weren't ready. Tell them you're ready now. Document everything. Keep building. Do not answer the phone until you decide you want to. Your boundaries are the first structure you build, and everything else goes on top of them. Have you ever had someone in your family take credit for your work, or try to use what you built for their own benefit? I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments, and if this resonated with you at all, subscribe and stay with us. At Recovery Stories, we believe that the most powerful transformations don't start with perfect conditions. They start with a single decision, often made in a cold parking lot, to keep moving forward anyway.